Well, it's finally happened, Danny. Um, I am pleased to say that I have sat down and celebrated Passover with everyone's favorite Jewish movie, 21
Eight
Jump Street.
Crazy Nights.
Yeah. We do a double feature. Actually, it's about to be a triple feature of Eight Crazy Nights, 21 Jump Street, and Uncut Gems. So, I would say if you haven't heard this story, I would be very amazed. But we gotta come out strong here. And we gotta talk about this
You,
because
my mom listens to this podcast, and I don't think she reads the news, so this is mostly for her at this point.
yeah, this is we're educating the masses. We have a duty, actually. So, since we have last met, um, Mr. Kanye West, or is he still going by Ye? I don't even know. I don't know
Who
anymore.
cares?
But he sat down around the end of March. He posted this on March 25th. Watching Jonah Hill in 21 Jump Street made me like Jewish people again. No one should take like just
It's just like every
I
time you hear it, it doesn't get any less absurd. You know?
like sometimes I look at it and I think about this and I'm like, is this real? Did I imagine this? And then sure enough, it was real. It was there. Yeah, he goes on to say that no one should take anger against one or two individuals and transform that hatred towards millions of innocent people. No Christian can be labeled anti-Semite knowing Jesus is Jew. Thank you, Jonah Hill. I love you.
Jesus fucking Christ.
So,
Oh God.
I there are a lot of things I wonder. First is like what prompted Kanye to sit down that day and go, I'm going to watch 21 Jump Street. And when he was watching it, was he like edge of his seat, like, oh my God? Or was he like sitting back and like, mm-hmm,
Mm.
yeah.
Oh, I absolutely believe it. Like everything you hear, the thing about Kanye West is like he's such a perfectly middlebrow auteur, or like he obviously has done things that have pushed pop music and rap music forward, but
Mm-hmm.
not in the way like someone who's like really high. Like trying to think of like who's a good middlebrow director, like a Spielberg, and like
Yeah.
I think that translates into like I have a feeling his taste in movies is not very good. You know?
Well, I think of that. One of my favorite Kanye clips is he's on some interview and he's like, have y'all seen Wreck It Ralph? And whenever someone starts talking about Wreck It Ralph, you're like, oh boy. And now he talks about the one character ended up being the glitch. He was like, and she was on the side of the video game the whole time. Like, it really makes me wonder if you were to sit Kanye West down in front of a real mind bender, not even like a big mind bender, sit him down in front of like Vertigo or something. If Wreck It Ralph is blowing this man's mind, what would like the Sixth Sense do to him?
Oh my god. Yo, I low key think Signs like eroded his mind to the point where it is today. When he's like, it's water? That's their weakness?
Yeah.
I'm sure. Also, because M. Night Shyamalan's movies all have like overtones that could be easily construed as Christian. I think that really helps as well. Let's see if Kanye can heal his love for all minorities by watching the complete filmography of M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah. Hear that, Kanye? This challenge is for you.
Welcome to We Demand a Podcast. I'm Danny.
I'm Tyler.
We're two very old friends with two very different tastes in music. So every month we get together and, try and one-up each other with how much better our taste in music is than the others. And, this month we actually have the perfect excuse for that. Because this is our first episode where both albums were featured on Rolling Stone's 2020 Top 500 Albums of All Time list. And mine was featured a few hundred entries above Tyler's. So just let the record show.
Mine was actually available in stores to go and buy. So so who wins that battle?
The consumer. How's that? In our capitalist society, the consumer's the winner. The album I gave Tyler is the 1989 seminal hip-hop classic 3 Feet High and Rising, the debut by Long Island hip-hop group similar to Marquee Moon last month, and sort of by the same community, honestly, was like immediately heralded, seen as this revolutionary record that kind of upended everything. It was named the 1989 Village Voice Album of the Year. And I think that, sometimes these records are influential in ways that are subtle, or their influence is short-lived or overblown when it happens. But I think you could make a case that this is one of the 10 most influential hip-hop records of all time. Tyler, you mentioned last episode you've been haunted by the most famous single from this album back at your job at Converse. But other than that, what'd you think?
I mean, I think that if you say you don't like this album, you should probably go see a doctor because your health is at great risk. I think something's wrong. You might have a brain tumor or something. I listening to this album, it's very fun. It's got a carefree spirit. I think it really it's one of those albums, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but in the sense the album cover really symbolizes what this album feels like. It's very sunny. It's like taking it easy on a nice day. You're kind of joking around, hanging with your friends, you're having a really good time. It doesn't necessarily take itself seriously in the sense that there are songs about dandruff and how do you tell
Body
your friends
odor?
that they smell your friend smells bad, and then even a whole track that's creating this whole analogy of animals talking to you but getting involved in helping out your city and stuff. It's just if you sit through this whole album without smiling, you're probably fucking dead. It's a really good time. I want to highlight my favorite tracks because I know there's a lot to talk about with this one. But
Of course.
For me, it was The Magic Number, I Know, Potholes in My Lawn, which was great because Portishead also used that same sample. And I was like, whoa. And then Plug Tune and Last Chance to Comprehend. That was those were the four that really stood out to me. Obviously, the skits stand out too. One thing I want to just kind of preface with our discussion is I purposely didn't do a lot of research with this one because I was kind of looking forward to this education lesson. There's a lot I know about this album.
Right.
I know enough about music and music history to understand its context in the time. Especially a lot of the other hip hop records coming out, like gangster rap out in the West Coast, is getting really big, and this sort of serves as this antithesis to it. But it's just a very fun and inventive record. It has a lot of energy, and I'm gonna be saying this a lot, but it just is. It's a very smiley record. You just feel good listening to it.
Yeah. So just one thing I want to say just off the top was people credit this record with kind of inventing this concept of the skit on hip hop records, which is kind of like a classic. I feel about Eddie Vedder singing, where when Eddie Vedder does it, I like it, but it really spawned a whole lot of terrible things in the decade to follow. Like the De La Soul orgy skit is, I don't hate it, honestly. I think it's kind of funny. The number of raunchy sex skits we get on 90s hip-hop records, probably most infamously Fuck Me off of Notorious B.I.G.'s Ready to Die, where a woman is... You can hear him clapping the cheeks and just a woman moaning like the worst fat jokes to him possible, you know?
Lord.
Which is to say, what De La Soul's doing here is very difficult, like, without being, like, too, like, overselling it, you know, it's a record that's very childlike and playful without being childish or juvenile. I think of like Picasso being like, you know, his whole thing, like, you have to learn how to paint like a child. And like so many people, including our cold open feature Kanye, wants to be Pablo, but are definitively not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I had to... I wrote something down earlier that if I had to like create an image of this album, it's just like this beautiful sunny day, walking around having a really good time. But as you talk through it, I picture, you know, like this New York neighborhood. They have the hopscotch chalk drawings on the sidewalk, people saying hi to each other. It's just, it feels like this very fun, embracing neighborhood. It has a lot of optimism, a lot of good vibes and energy. And, you know, going back to the skits, very sexual skits. I mean, a few episodes ago we talked about Dr. Octagon, you know? Like,
Yeah.
You're not gonna have an album like Dr. Octagon if it wasn't for this. I definitely felt the same way about the orgy skit. I think
Like,
the second, like, on the, yeah, on other listens of this album, I was like, all right, we'll just skip that one. I don't need to listen to that right now.
So what I'll say about this one and the skit is that the biggest gripe people have of a lot of records of the 90s and early 2000s is the skits are not their own tracks, so you can't skip them. And in this way, they perfected the art form by making them skippable. The only skits, quote, that aren't skippable are like, there's a few 10 seconds where they go back. So in the intro track, they set up as like a game show, and with all of the three members of the group, and the producer Prince Paul, who I want to get to a little later. And so there's a few tracks, like I think every quarter of the way through the record, they'll have one of the contestants come back and like, oh, what are the answers? Like, oh, I don't know. And that's like it.
Yeah.
You know, but I think that you're right that it's a very sunny, like, they were almost immediately compared to hippies. Like, that was, you know, and the imagery, I would say, didn't help. However, On Me, Myself, and I, Posthumous raps, we're not hippies, that's Plug Bull. You know, I understand the tendency to do that, but, you know, they do have, like, Ghetto Thing on this record, and I would say also, like, Tread Water, and then to some extent Potholes in My Lawn. There's more, not that the hippies didn't have social commentary, but it feels a bit more pointed than a lot of, like, Love the One You're With, or whatever, you know?
Right.
Like,
right.
some, it doesn't approach Ohio, but it's definitely not, like, the stupidest, like, you know, like, I would say one thing that I think of with hippies is it's very, there's a hedonism to it, and I think this is kind of inherently anti-hedonistic. Like, one thing on this record, and if you watch the videos, like I did last night especially, like you pointed out, this comes out in 89, NWA Straight Outta Compton is 88.
Yeah.
So, but like also the New York hip hop scene had also, like, hip hop we really think of as kind of breaking through in the early 90s with like gangster rap. But like Run DMC was really big, you know, Public Enemy was a platinum selling artist, right? It wasn't insignificant. And, you know, the Village Voice at the time said that if Public Enemy's punk, De La Soul is new wave. And I think that makes, I like that more in the hippie analogy, but like it's definitely in reaction. in the same way like we talk about Sonic Youth kind of being in reaction, but not reactionary, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with all that.
Yeah, I guess if you want like more, the other thing I think it's funny the songs you picked as your favorites. Some of I think uh what fuck I can't even look at the title. The last one or God damn it. It's not Potholes in My Lawn was not a single.
There were like eight
what?
singles on this for this album.
Yeah, that's true. But anyway, the ones I like are like the poppier singles, which maybe makes me a mark. Like when I was re-listening to this, I was kind of like Tyler, like I'm sorry, but like Me, Myself, and I is definitely the best song on this album.
It is a very cool and unique song. Listening to this, I've gained a bit more appreciation, but just like,
Yeah,
I mean, we
understand.
could have a whole conversation about how retail really makes you hate certain things that you maybe used to love.
Of course, but I also like. I mean, I really like. I think honestly, my favorite parts were the sex songs. I think Jennifer was great. Jennifer, oh, and then Buddy. I wanted to point to Buddy. I also believe is the first appearance of Q-Tip on a record. The single comes out in '88. The first Tribe singles are '89. And he might have been on like a Jungle Brothers single, who's the other rapper on Buddy is from the Jungle Brothers. And this is going to be me doing more history because you asked for it, but De La Soul is the breakout member of the Native Tongues collective posse, whatever you want to call them, who were sort of the vanguards for alternative rap on the East Coast, and that's kind of where it originates. Founded by the Jungle Brothers, who kind of are completely forgot to time, probably because the other members of Native Tongues that you might have heard of are De La Soul, A Tribe Called Quest, Queen Latifah, and Black Sheep, who you may not know, but you definitely know This or That, which was like a huge single in '91. And there are a few others, but those are kind of the main ones. And so, like, while the Jungle Brothers were doing their thing, I think what separates De La Soul from those early Tribe records and the Jungle Brothers records are, I think it's less focused on Afrocentrism than those other two, which I think helps give it some levity in what it's talking about. But also, like, De La Soul does get into, like, the jazz boom bappy stuff, but definitely not on this record, you know? And it's just one more thing I want to say, and I think you can comment on this, but I've seen people use the term golden age of rap to refer to the 90s, and that's just not correct. Like, not to be actually guy, but it's sort of like the golden age of comics versus the silver age. Like, in many ways, the silver age, which is like the 60s, might be more iconic, but the golden age is the golden age because it was like a certain, formative years for creating concepts that would go out. And the golden age, this is a firmly golden age record because the golden age essentially ends in '91 when a series of artists, including De La Soul for a song off this record, get sued for sampling. And after that, you have to pay licensing rights and royalties on the sample. And what makes the production on this so unique, even compared, to those Tribe records, is that, it was fully conceptualized out of that Bismarcky lawsuit era. And it has, like, people have been doing these pastiche of 90s records or, like, boom bap stuff since it started, or since, like, 2001 or whatever. No one is ever going to attempt to make this particular sound of record again because of just like the legal constraints of it all.
Yeah, and if they are, it's going to be released in like such an underground capacity that it's not. Well, I mean, with how music spreads on the internet, but I don't think it would have such a wide, expansive like it's not gonna have as wide of a reach. You'd have to be in the know to know.
Right.
It's not gonna hit like charts and be fully recognized. It would be one of those albums that like 5 years later people be like, oh shit, have you heard this? Yeah, I mean, obviously the sampling I think is the main conversation piece here. Before we really dive deep, I do want to mention I think one of my favorite sounds on the record, is in Me, Myself, and I, the little like keyboard, it just reminds me of like Sonic the Hedgehog. like it sounds like a song from one of those games. Um like the like Sonic the Hedgehog 1 or 2,
Yeah.
and those soundtracks slap. So I mean it's a fun song, and this was making me re-enjoy it.
I
But
do want to say quickly on that,
yeah.
is that's a pretty famous Parliament Funkadelic song. And another point of the Golden Age is like you might have these more like layered samples, but you rarely get people using just like super recognizable samples anymore, unless they're P Diddy,
Yeah.
which is both good and bad. You know?
Yeah, I mean, with the sampling, it's obviously like the core of the album. It's very creative, a lot of upbeat samples. It's I love the idea of sampling and remix culture in general. I really like the idea that art is always building upon itself by taking something that's already been made and then you make it into something new. Not in the sense of, oh, I stole this, but you just are pretty much literally building on top of it. And none of these samples sound just like their original sources. They're always sort of thrown in. I think of the Stand By Me sample. I forget exactly
The
which
Sean
track
Kingston
that's on.
song. Oh no, on this record. No, I couldn't tell you off the top
Yeah,
of my
yeah.
head.
But it's just like bum bum bum. They keep re-sampling that bit, and
Mhm.
it just takes a very recognizable part of the original song that they're sampling, and then you kind of have a whole idea. I mean, I think a great example is "Potholes in My Lawn." I recognize that sample from Portishead, who also sampled it, and the song that they use it in completely different from "Potholes in My Lawn." And both of those songs are very different from the original track. And I think that that's really, really special. That in and of itself is art. How you can recontextualize something, you give it a whole new meaning. It's super fascinating to me. And once sampling really took off, it just changed music forever. I mean, I think Paul's Boutique came out the same year. Beastie
Yeah,
Boys, which is like a
yeah.
bunch of sampling as well. It
Hmm.
was gonna happen sooner or later, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's less of an issue with artists and more of just the failings of copyright and intellectual property laws and how they just couldn't really accurately predict this stuff. I mean, it's something that we still struggle with. And like where's the line drawn in the sense of
Hmm.
like, well, that's still my idea. I mean, if you ask me, I think crediting the artist and saying, hey, um, shout out to like so and so, they have credits on this song as well. But then you tie into who is getting the money that the
Right.
song makes and all that stuff. And a big argument that people make is with a lot of these songs that were sampling old um like blues songs and funk songs from a lot of other minority artists, those original artists were sort of being erased for these other artists. It's a very complicated
Yeah.
situation. I don't have the final answer, but it's just
Right.
so fascinating. It's very messy.
I think what's interesting is that on that front, I kind of want to. Well, also I want to say the artist that sued De La Soul was the Turtles. There's a Turtles sample on the skit with with the other sample from the beginner's French lesson. And that guy said sampling is just a longer term for theft. So fuck that guy.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
one of I think I don't know if it's true, but I saw a YouTube documentary like a few years ago about like the most sampled thing of all time. And that drummer has like never gotten any royalties for the
Is it
backbeat. Right?
the James Brown
No. So
drum
that
sample?
no. There's like three. If there's like five, it's the Amen drum break, which is like the foundation for drum and bass. Essentially, like every drum and bass song is essentially doing the rhythm of the Amen drum break. And And a lot of, the Honey Impeach the President, I think, is the most sampled one in hip hop. It's on this record. I couldn't tell you what's on the top of my head. That's from a very obscure group, like the Honey Drippers, who probably haven't seen any money from the sampling. And the people who really reamed this were like, kind of washed up classic rock white dudes, like the Turtles, and they're the ones who kind of really blew this open. In the words of an artist I'll eventually give you on this podcast, money changes everything. There was an interesting case of it kind of going in the opposite direction. Mac Miller got sued by legendary 90s producer Lord Finesse over his breakout single, Kool-Aid and Frozen Pizza, which was just him rapping over a beat. And he released it for free on YouTube and on streaming. And Lord Finesse sued him on the grounds that because he was making money off performing the song and like merch sales, that he deserved a cut of Mac Miller's stuff. And he actually lost that case. And I think that was like 2012 or so. Earlier than that, like 2010 to 11. And that I think was a big factor in like the mixtape, like the peak end of the mixtape blog era being as creative as it was. On the raw production aspect of the sampling, like Prince Paul is one of my all-time favorite producers. He produced the first two De La Soul records pretty much in full. He was the DJ for a Stetsasonic, who's one of these sort of like another classic golden age groups. But he's also done a lot of interesting stuff. Like he's the producer behind the Gravediggers, which is the first horrorcore group. So he can do everything, but his style is very much marked by something that happens in the post-golden age. You might want to call it the silver age, I don't know. Of like post-copyright stuff is there's a big incentive to make the samples unrecognizable through things like chopping or playing with the EQ really dramatically or applying filters. And that really defines a lot of the 90s sound. On the other end, you have Dr. Dre doing interpolations with a live band instead of sampling. Like, Me, Myself, and I is kind of in a way like sampling such a synth-heavy funkadelic riff is kind of setting the scene for that whole thing a few years later, you could argue. But like you said with the Otis, right, with the Stand By Me sample, it's like they didn't even chop the entire like bass loop, just enough to let you know. But like this idea of just like basically we're just going to like loop and layer these loops in such a way that it creates a whole new texture. And there's a story about the Public Enemy production team. It would be 9 guys in a room, each with a turntable, and they would all just start playing records at the same time. And then eventually over the span of hours, they'd like develop a beat and Prince Paul, the vibes have that, but I would say it's much more careful. It's much more restrained. And you mentioned the creativity with the samples. Another thing this album is kind of influential and was heralded for was like, the New York hip hop scene was running out of James Brown records to sample in 1989. It was like literally they were like running out of James Brown songs they hadn't sampled. Yeah. And so while there are classic soul and funk songs on here, they're sampling like psychedelic rock and children's records, and like I mentioned earlier, like a fucking French instructional record. And it really kind of, I think, gives you the space for people like Cool Keith, that Dr. Octagon record, anything that's kind of weird sample wise going forward. And Prince Paul was friends with MF Doom, and I think you can really hear Doom's approach to like sampling all of like the comic book radio show skits, and even like the very kind of almost childish playful sample of soul samples and shit at times. I think that comes straight from
I thought about that a lot. Yeah, I thought about that a lot too. It as we're talking about this, it makes me think of, bring up Introducing, an album that we talked about that is entirely sample based. And then doing research for that record, I didn't find a lot of stuff of issues regarding people trying to claim, oh, that's my music on there. So it's like, it's just complicated. You know, is it just down to whomever is like, well, you know what? I'm gonna open up a can of worms here because I think I'm entitled to it. And also, fuck the Turtles because I hate that "Happy Together" song. It's fucking annoying. I hate that stupid song. So
And they also helped ruin sampling. So there you go.
yeah, sons of bitches. We are anti the Turtles on here.
Let
So
me just double check something.
make sure they're not listening.
I
Make
was
sure
gonna
they
say
don't
I thought
control the.
I thought they were British, but they're not British. So never mind.
That does sound like a British band.
It does.
Well, I bet you one
No.
of them was British. I bet you
Yeah,
one of those guys.
Descendants of Brits, you know.
Yeah, I don't care. They suck so much. I don't care enough to know. I don't care enough to do research on you. You're beneath me. But yeah, it's just
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No. You please. You were on a roll.
Well, just thinking a lot about Plunderphonics and albums like introducing "Since I Left You" by the Avalanches and making music almost like a photo collage of taking things that you personally didn't make, but you have manipulated them in a way that is something new. Again, that "Stand By Me" bass line, it's not the same exact bass line. It's like four notes, and I'm sure there's some artists who are totally fine with it, and then you even have a whole conversation of the whole "Stairway to Heaven" debacle, right? Of how that melody was just straight up stolen from another band. There's the I also think of Jack White being pissed at Dan Auerbach and the Black Keys, and he's all like, "Oh,
Well,
they stole my sound," even though like, dude, you are literally just making music that is just blues from black musicians. Like, you didn't invent that. And it's just something I wrote down was just profiting off the work of others is the classic American pastime. You know? Like, the idea that like, is De La Soul really gonna make all this money that I'm in the
no.
Turtles and I'm like, those sons of bitches, that could have been me.
I mean,
Like,
they sued him for like 2.5 million in like 91. So like
yeah.
that might have been
And, like,
everything they made off this record, you know.
right. And like, I could really dig deep into reading about the case, but like, how much money did this album really make? How
Right.
much did the original song make? And it's just, honestly, it's just fucking stupid. At the end of the day, just a lot of nonsense where you have like Old Town Road sampling that Nine Inch Nails song, and Trent Reznor's like, I think it's pretty cool. Like,
But
you
Trent
know?
but Trent Reznor rocks.
Yeah, Trent Reznor is fucking cool. The Turtles are not.
Trent Reznor, you are allowed to guest on the pod. The Turtles, it's on site. It's on site. You better
Yeah.
watch these hands.
We're beating your ass. We're fucking beating your ass.
One thing I could wax poetic about the sampling and the production and Prince Paul all day. You mentioned
Yeah.
the Avalanches record. They obviously credit him as a big influence. He did some remixes of songs on that record, but the other thing, the other iconic legacy of this, well, not iconic, but like the De La Soul approach to lyricism, I think is very interesting and enjoyable and unique, because they have a very subdued sort of and subtle approach to writing. Like, this is 1989, and with the exception of like four or five rappers in the public eye, like, no, the rapping is still kind of simple. It's still a little elementary, like the rhyme schemes in particular. The flows are not, you're not going to hear, I mean, thank God you're not going to hear like an Eminem rap god bullshit over this, but like, that stuff is there's one guy who's kind of starting to do that sort of level of technical rhythmic stuff, but he's not really anywhere of note. But they write in this way that's esoteric and also extremely full of slang they just invented. Like there was a term you mentioned, and I looked. Do you remember what it was off the top of your head?
Was it the Dan Stuckey thing?
Yeah, I was reading about that.
Yeah.
They're like, oh yeah, we just made that up. Like in our mind, it just means awesome, you know. And like buddy is something they made up. I'm pretty sure Jennifer is another one they made up. Like,
I mean, honestly, like dandruff. like, like, is this song literally about dandruff, or is it like something cooler?
you know? But like, and like even like the way like he delivers like that bars about being hippies on Me, Myself, and I, Pasta News.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the line breaks are is really odd. And I honestly found it kind of hard to follow the narrative sometimes. And I don't mean that as a detriment, but just like the way they actually break up the cadence and the syllables despite being in like a more simplistic framework, I think is really great. I think it's, you know, it's rarely replicated, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, this is really a one-of-a-kind record. I want to explore more De La Soul now that their whole catalog is pretty easily accessible, and
you should.
Yeah,
the first four De La Soul. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna go into like a separate, like kind of another topic, because last time I made a whole joke about like Pokemon versus Digimon, and in the sense of De La Soul and Tribe Called Quest, and I just kind of want to like touch, maybe like briefly go back to that, because it sounded like from our last conversation, you sort of put De La Soul on a higher level.
No.
And I don't think it's fair to say, oh well, one's better than the other, because I think they're kind of different. You know, I mean, I've heard more Tribe than De La Soul, but like listening to 3 Feet High and Rising, I wasn't like, oh wow, this is a lot like a Tribe Called Quest. I could see similarities, but like at no point was I like, oh yeah, they're just like them.
I mean, right. I mean, Q-Tip's on this record. They're collaborators, right? Like, you know, they're part of the same artistic scene. There's going to be similarities. You know, Tribe, I think, so this record comes, like I said, at the very tail end of the golden age of hip-hop. Tribe is very much one of the first breakout groups of the next era. And I think because of that, and I also think that era is just more popular. I don't know if I wouldn't say it's aged better. Maybe as a whole it has. I think like the best golden age stuff is just as good as anything. But like I said, they're running out of James Brown samples. And so I think because of that, Tribe just has like a bigger like footprint in our culture. Like why is the sort of Tribe woman logo so much more iconic than the flowers or whatever?
Yeah.
You could argue that like if Tribe had 3 great records, De La Soul had 4. You know, I do think the biggest difference is that I think we look at Q-Tip as such an auteur, you know, doing all the production, pioneering jazz rap, you know, being a rapper with a super iconic voice. And, you know, the auteur of the first 2 De La Soul records is Prince Paul. He's not on those next 2 classics. They start doing jazz rap on those next 2, and it's great. But, like, I think their identity is a bit more, like, chameleonized because of that. And, you know, R.I.P. to Trugoy the Dove and Pasta News. Neither of them, I don't mean voices in artistic voice. I mean literal, like, larynx vocal cords. Their voices are not as iconic as Q-Tip or Fife. And I think all that stuff contributes. But I think, you know, I don't want to say it's a Beatles Stones, because that's like an argument I think is one. Maybe it's like a Who Stones argument, you know?
Yeah.
I do think De La Soul's a bit more psychedelic. I think they push the boundaries in a very different way than Tribe. But unlike Tribe, their stuff gets a bit bloated at some point, you know? Like but those, I don't know. The first 4 records are wonderful. I think if you like Tribe, you absolutely got to listen to De La Soul. You got to listen to this record. But I don't know. It's hard. Like, I think there's such a, you know, especially with rap, you know, there's such a, like, a tendency to view it as a sport. And, you know, It's obviously like
Hmm.
a reoccurring motif in the genre. But they don't have to compete. They were friends. They were
Yeah,
both making amazing art in the same scene. Like, let's just appreciate it all.
yeah, I agree. It's nice that I think the sports analogy was very good. I think a lot about like in the world of soccer, everyone's always going on like Messi versus Ronaldo, and it's like, look, why don't you just appreciate the fact that you got to watch two players at the height of their careers, like at the same time. Like you don't, and not everything has to be pitted up against each other. I think both of these acts are distinct. Doing things that only they can do, and also doing things similar, but it's like that's kind of the joy of it. Just looking over my notes here, I mean I feel like we touched upon mostly everything.
This might be your final question, but I think it's the last like big concept, which is another reason I think De La Soul hasn't been in the culture is their stuff wasn't on streaming until March
Yeah,
2023. Um, and like that really impacted their tribe. I think if you talk to teenagers today, people in the early 20s, Zoomers for lack of a better term, they would be way more familiar with Tribe just because they probably heard it. It was on a playlist. Like if you're like, oh, I like boom
yeah,
jazz rap, it's going to be a lot of fucking Tribe. You're not going to get any of the classic De
yeah.
La Soul jazz rap on that. And I think,
It was used in more like media, movies, stuff like that. Like I think of the scenario.
of course,
I've seen that used in like a trailers for NBA 2K. I've seen it in commercials. I've seen it in movies. Um, and really the only main media presence I've seen with De La Soul songs has been like the ending of that like shitty Spider-Man movie with three is the magic number. Like I can't think of like nothing else is coming to mind, and I think that's kind of down just to like it was probably a fucking minefield to navigate the rights and securing them.
oh my god, for sure. I mean, I will say, this the sample of Me, Myself, and I is also the Good Burger movie theme, so it's not exactly the same. But when I heard it, I thought it was going to be De La Soul, but it was not. It was probably just cheaper, like I said, to only pay
Yeah,
Parliament. Yeah, yeah. I hadn't really considered that, but you're totally right. That definitely is why, because this is their most iconic record, and it's like
yeah,
it's like legally untouchable.
yeah. Unless you're like Disney with big fat Marvel money, and you're like, fuck it, who cares? We'll include it in our Spider-Man movie,
Oh god,
whatever. Good
the
Burger,
real.
as fantastic as a movie as it is, can you imagine it did have De La Soul? Like, fuck.
It would be even
Best
better.
Picture.
Good Burger is a seminal anti-capitalist text, and I won't say
It
anything
really
further on the
is.
subject. But yeah, I mean, I think it's sad, and I think there's a record I want to give you very soon. I don't think this next episode, but one of like the next two or three that I really want to get into streaming and how it's really changed not just like
Yeah.
the climate of music and like the industry, quote unquote, but the actual like approach to the songs and albums themselves. But I
Hmm.
think we've already ranted quite a bit.
Right. Yeah. I'm interested in having that conversation too. I don't think this album is the right album for it. This is better on like, you know, copyright, intellectual property stuff that we've talked about with sampling. But conversations about streaming definitely important to have, and I'm looking forward to talking about that.
Do you have any final thoughts?
No, no more final thoughts. I think that's it.
R.A.P. Trugoy the Dove. Legend. Great record. You know, we are culture warriors on this podcast. We stand up for all of the men and only men who have been wronged by the woke mob. And we got another crucial update in the battle on wokeness. This comes to us from
They changed the color of the green M&M entirely.
They made her less sexy.
They invented a new color.
They took away her sexy boots, and I am outraged. But this story comes to us
the green differently.
they made it more of a motherly and less hot and sexy green, and I am livid.
Well, can you imagine if they made her orange? And speaking of orange,
oh brother, yeah, the fucking Dutch. I hate the Dutch, and this is kind of why. I was actually at a bar like 3 weeks ago, and I was just like, he was like, I'm from the Netherlands, like I'm living in the Netherlands, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, that must be hard.
Yeah, there's a reason why they are just like, you can smoke weed whenever you want. You have,
dude, to eat the food they eat there, you have to, bro. You invented slavery and the global spice trade, and you're eating like say what you will at the Brits, they at least embraced curry or whatever. Not the fucking Dutch. No, sir. Anyway, I digress. The headline is serial sperm donor taken to court over incest fears after fathering 550 children. And it speaks for itself. There's not much more to say.
Yeah, we don't really need to do a bit for this. It's I guess that's kind of it.
The only bit I will say is there's a picture of the dude in here, and when I went to Spain last year, and I was trying to communicate to these bartenders, and they were like, where, because I was like, oh, I don't really speak Spanish. Like, oh, where are you from? Or so they asked me what language I spoke, and they asked me 6 different languages before just being like, where the fuck are you from, you dumbass? The first thing they said was Dutch, and I was like, oh, and now I see this guy, and I'm like, I do look like,
no,
I could definitely be his cousin. Insulting. Yeah, it's fucked up. But, maybe I one day can father 551 children just to prove I'm better than my weird, like, Dutch doppelganger.
Yeah, he's going to soil your good name.
I'm doing it the old-fashioned way, though. None of this high-tech sperm donor shit.
Yeah, you got a Tinder Premium.
Brother, I'm paying... Dude, there's a secret Tinder Premium that they only give you once they know that you're about this life, called Tinder Platinum. It costs $500 a month, and let me tell you, it's worth it.
Oh, Lord. Should we, any more information we can give about our Dutch guy? Should we get right into it?
I have one more. They said that one of the reasons they have a limit on the number of children you can give birth to via sperm bank is psychological distress for donor children who learn they have dozens of biological siblings or more. And I'm like, I don't know, those family reunions might be lit,
Yeah, but then think about the holidays and you got to get all these people gifts.
God,
God, no.
You're buying a bag of M&Ms and giving everyone one.
Except the green ones. Those are for me.
All right,
oh, wow.
What's the next fucking record?
So, I gave Danny the 1997 landmark classic album, I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One, from Hoboken, New Jersey's finest, Yo La Tengo. So, Yo La Tengo, they've been making music for nearly 40 years. They formed in 1984. I think they're one of the most consistent bands out there. They actually put out a new album this year called This Stupid World. And Yo La Tengo were inevitably going to show up on this podcast, but having listened to that new record a lot, I saw them at the 9:30 Club in March. It's been a big Yo La Tango phase again for me recently, so I thought it was appropriate to give you this album. It's very important to my taste, my own guitar playing style. So I'll just ask you, what'd you think?
You know, the first time so I also want to say I just by timing I didn't get to do my famous like 10 listens.
Only 9 this time.
Yeah. The first time I listened to this, I fucking hated it. However, I listened to it again today, like 2 hours ago or so, and yeah, I really like it. I like it more than I love it. I think what I will say about Yo La Tengo from just listening to this record, and that's therefore, and I have the definitive statement on their entire 40-year career, is they're a super controlled band. They're one of the tightest bands I've ever heard. And not only being super tight, they can kind of do with that whatever they want. You know, like this album is a real hodgepodge of styles and motifs and genres. And and I think that is the only like negative I could say about it, if you want to call that a negative. Like, there are some things about my own personal taste that not everything personally works for me, but everything is executed like so perfectly that I can't be like, oh, this sucks or this is bad.
Yeah.
My question is, I'm going to assume that they're a critical darling, right? Like the critics go apeshit for this band.
Yeah, I mean, critics really like them. They're not critical darlings in like the Radiohead sense. I critics really loved This Stupid World, but I would agree that it is one of their best records in a while. The last time, well, they put out a record I think in 2020 that was a lot of like more sort of spacey, ambient, improvised stuff because like they're just messing around in the studio during COVID. Like, what else were they gonna do? And then the album before that, I think was either 2016 or 2017, and that had a more like late night 2 a.m. feel, kind of like chill and down tempo. But I really don't think they have a bad record. Everything is from it's like this is good or like this is really good. They, like you said, they are an insanely tight band. I think that's owed a lot to the fact that Ira Kaplan, the guitarist, and George Hubley, the drummer, are married. They were a couple when the band was formed, which I'll kind of touch upon later because I think a lot of that sort of coincides with the themes of this record. But yeah, critics do enjoy Yo La Tengo, to answer your question.
I mean, I this just seems like such a critics band to me, and I mean that not derogatorily or positively. It's just like back when I wanted to be a music critic, like thank God I did not take that route for many reasons. I try to put myself in the space of how well does this execute what they're going for before I would ask, is what they're going for good? That's actually how I finally came around to liking pop music after being like, I think it's stupid because it's popular, sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what this record is. It's just execution. Like, I mean, there's a bossa nova song on here, and I was like, this could be on like a like Gibraltar record. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's just
you have a noisy Beach Boys cover.
Yeah. So on that, I guess just say my faves to get a sense of what, if you can pick out what I liked most on this record, it would be Autumn Sweater for sure.
Yeah,
Stockholm Syndrome, Sugarcube, and then We're an American Band. Those are like my big four.
Yeah, I mean those are all great songs. Autumn Sweater is one of the best Yo La Tengo songs made. The drums at that in the beginning are just that shit will be in my head forever. I'd love to see someone like sample that and like do some freestyling over it. I think it'd be kind of interesting.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
You want me to spit some bars?
Oh, for sure.
But to kind of roll things back a little bit, you know, they had been kicking around for a while. They formed in 1984. This album came out in 97. This is their 8th record. So the reason I picked this, it is not my personal favorite Yo La Tengo album. I think that would be Painful. That came out in 93, and that's has a more of an emphasis on like uh the shoegaze elements, bit more atmospheric ambience to it. But for a band that, when they first started playing music, they did a lot of covers. They were kind of, I don't want to call them a cover band, but they have, when you see them live, they always do sort of like a crazy cover. They've have done a few specials at radio stations where people can donate money and like, hey, play this song, and they don't know what the song's gonna be, but they fucking nail it. They are fantastic musicians. They're really great at what they're doing. I think Georgia Hubley is a very underrated drummer. I love her voice. James McNew has such driving bass lines, and Ira Kaplan's guitar style has been a very big influence on my playing. The way he can just start getting very noisy and doing like the freak out moments, but they never feel something as wild as like Sonic Youth with like super insane tunings, and I'm putting like a drumstick underneath my guitar. Though it's ironic that I say that because when I saw them, he literally did put drumsticks under his guitar strings. So I guess he proved my ass wrong. Um, but you don't have a career that goes on for nearly 40 years now and like not be very good at what you're doing and still selling out the 930 Club. But the reason I picked this album is because a lot of people say this is their magnum opus. I think the album does kind of, it makes a good argument for that. I think in the sense of whenever you have bands whose style is kind of all over the place, like In Rainbows, it doesn't sound like Kid A, but it's a good entry point into understanding a survey of this band and their sound and what they do. So you can say, hey, I like these songs. Okay, if you like those, check out this album because this album is like a bunch of that. Oh, you liked a lot of the noisy stuff? Check this out because they do more of that. So even trying to decide what album I wanted to pick, that was a little tricky because, again, personal favorite, gun to my head, I'd say Painful. But is it the most accurate example of Yo La Tengo sound? Not quite sure. So, it does sound like you kind of gravitated to more of the like the poppier songs, like Autumn Sweater, Stockholm Syndrome. But those are great songs. Those are like, I really think they sort of, here's something I wrote is that they really just capture like indie rock very perfectly. They just it has the pop sensibilities that future indie rock would have.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's also full of a lot of the less accessible moments, like Spec Bebop. Like I love that song because I love getting. I'm sure you probably knew you like when you heard that you're probably like, oh yeah, this has Tyler written all over it. But like getting lost in just like these drones and this noise. It's one of the classics of indie rock, and it's so pivotal to looking at that genre because it captures that youthful experimentation and spirit of the 90s, and I think that's why a lot of people like just make them very synonymous with 90s indie, because when you think a lot about those 90s indie bands, that's kind of what they were doing. It was either like youthful in whether it was optimism or pessimism, or they were just like tinkering around with stuff and getting weird.
Imagine a guy who was like 40 in the 90s and he was like, I didn't think the 90s were youthful at all. What I'll say about the ones I gravitated towards were like, I think that, like I said, the main thing is they're just such a tight band. And the songs I gravitated towards most were the songs that I think best reflected that tightness as a virtue. And low-key, I would say it's like the folksier stuff. Like some other ones I liked were like 1 p.m. again, or like My Little Corner of the World, which are very folksy.
Yeah, great song.
And I think with the noise stuff, and this is not a demerit, why I don't think they worked for me as much was I loved Sonic Youth because it was so just like chaotic and raw, and I think I wanted a bit more. Like it's so like I don't want to say maybe deliberate. Like even in Spec Bebop, which is 12 fucking minutes, right, or whatever, 11 minutes.
Yeah.
Like it is a carefully composed like 11 minutes. Like you can really feel the intention of every coming like 10 measures or whatever. Versus the Sonic Youth record, when they made that, if they made a 7-minute song, it would just be them like wildly thrashing. You know what I mean? Just like taking their guitar by the neck and smashing it against the wall of the studio to see what happened.
Right.
But they're still fucking good. You know, I can't be like, oh yeah, that shit fucking. But like I said, I think when in this record, when they were able to be like, oh yeah, we can harmonize like fucking Crosby, Stills, and Nash. We can fucking we can fucking do vocal lines like the Velvet Underground or whatever. Like when they get in that bag, I think it really resonated with me. I'm just like, damn, this is just like top tier, like indie folk pop, indie folk rock, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think they're one of the best bands at creating very sonically beautiful moments. Like sometimes I listen to Green Arrow and I'm like low-key overwhelmed by just how mesmerizingly beautiful that song is, and it's very simplistic at the end of the day. It's just like sparse percussion. I think there's like a shaker, that like a simple bass line, and just I mean, come on, who doesn't like hearing crickets at night? And you bring up We're an American Band, that bass line, doom 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 doom, like I could listen to that for like an hour, just like that bass line, and someone just like noodling around on a guitar. It gets you in a headspace. And I think it's a good transition to. I mentioned it earlier, the fact that Ira and Georgia are a couple, and I think it's important to bring that up when talking about this album, because I really think this album is just a beautiful representation of love and togetherness and connection. I mean, it's literally called "I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One," which has a lot of different interpretations you can take from that. You know, speaking of this band as a unit, they're so tight. The heart of the band is one, but I think it's a great representation of that, because this album gets intimate, it gets noisy, it gets tender, it gets aggressive, it can be melancholy, and it can be happy. And that's what love and a relationship, whether it's romantic or platonic, that's what a relationship is. And I think they portray that so well over the course of this record. I mean, Stockholm Syndrome, like the song is literally about the title, right? And it's this beautiful track. Like it is a great indie folk pop song. It's like, yeah, like this is great. Shout out James McNew on the vocals. That was the first song he was doing the vocals on. But this album pines to exist outside of like the time and space that we know. And I think that's what love and relationships do, right? It takes you out of your current space and into something completely different. And I think a lot of
like
these songs do that. Yeah, gets you into some hole.
You know, as one of the reasons I brought up, I didn't listen to it as much as I maybe would have wanted to. Just a bunch of shit was going on. Was that every time I listened to it, my thoughts on the songs changed. Like I had new favorites every time. Songs that were my favorite the last listen were, you know, maybe demoted to like top 4 or something. And I think that speaks to what you're saying about like it's so complicated and layered that it really belies you to like really sink your teeth into it. Like I will say, I thought the vocals were not always mixed in the most auditory way, which is fine. Like I don't mean that as like an issue.
Like Deeper Into Movies, I think it's very deliberate on Deeper Into Movies, because the vocals are definitely buried on that one.
Right. No, and I think because honestly the mixing on this record is pretty distinct song to song, which I think is why it pissed me off the first time I listened to it. I was like, I don't want to have to keep changing the volume on my fucking speaker or whatever. Um, I think it might have just been that, honestly. But it was obviously intentional. Like it obviously you don't make 7 albums that are like, let's just get real sloppy with like the mastering on this one. But I was saying, like,
Yeah.
when I could get into the like understand the lyrics, I can't pick out any off the top of my head, but I think particularly the ones on Autumn Sweater, Stockholm Syndrome, and 1 p.m. again were just very beautiful and crisp. And I really want to return to this record, particularly the songs I really like, just to like be able to derive what I'm sure is even more technical prowess and superb like songwriting from the actual lyrics themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think their songs grow on you in the sense that I think for me it was love at first listen. Um, but even then, when I first listened to their new album, I was like, "Oh, this is really good." And then it's like fast forward a week, I'm like, "Jesus Christ, all I'm listening to is Yo La Tango." Just like you blink and you're like, "How the fuck did they do this to me?" Because you just kind of keep noticing other little things. I think they are a really good example of sometimes less is more. They don't. Again, it's 3 people in this band. It's not packed to the gills with all of these little things here and there that are going on. It's usually just very tight drums, really good bass line, and some just really pleasant guitar stuff to listen to. Or it's like, wow, yeah, you're going crazy on that guitar. Um, and I think to me their music has always been optimistically pessimistic. Like, again, the new
Mm.
album, This Stupid World, and it's just like even on this one they just kind of talk about I forget which one it is, but the lyric pretty much just talking about how like it's kind of weird that you're here now. Like I always dreamed about you and I always thought about you, and now that you're here, like it's weird. Uh, and that can be like a beautiful, surreal sense, but it also can be this sort of like, wow, maybe this like wasn't all it was cracked up to be. But I think
Mm.
they see the cracks and their dirtiness underneath everything, but they also admire the beauty of existence and life.
No, I think that's a good point with that lyric, but also like the songs themselves. Like
Like Stockholm Syndrome.
I was gonna say,
There's just
Stockholm
like a
Syndrome,
yeah, like that noisy guitar solo kind of comes out of nowhere.
or I was gonna say like with like Stockholm Syndrome, like it's a pretty dark subject matter, honestly. Like it's about feeling like trapped and in love with your like the relationship you're trapped in. But it's such a pretty fucking song, Like not that it's a
Yeah.
particularly like not that it's not like a classic motif, but like it is that way of like I'm sure you could read that and be like, actually, like it's goody as Stockholm Syndrome. Like I like it, or maybe not. I
Yeah.
don't know. We'll have to ask them. But you,
You're
you
like,
know,
how'd you feel about this?
you've been getting very poetical in your various descriptions today, and I have not. So I'm glad that the energies are to balance out.
Yeah. I'm curious, how many times did you listen to this one?
4,
Okay. At
like 4,
like
and
what
then I listened to some songs specifically.
gotcha. At what point like do you know what listen it was where it like kind of finally clicked for you?
Oh, the second one for sure.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah, because I just find that interesting. Where like at first it's like I absolutely hate this, and then it's like oh wait a minute.
I think I was just not in the right headspace for some. Like this album's kind
Yeah.
of like it's very warm and laid back and relaxing. I was just not in that headspace when I listened to it. And like I said, the mixing thing, it sounded better when I listened to it in like a better sound system, honestly. But that was just really throwing me off. Um, the other thing I was going to say is that the time of day I listened to this very much influenced what my songs I liked more. Like the second listen, I listened to it kind of late at night, like between like I started listening maybe like 9:30, and
Yeah.
Shadows was my favorite song on that listen for sure, like bar none. But then like today I was listening to it walking around, and that's when Sugarcube clicked for me because it was like sunny and like 3 in the afternoon. I was like, yeah, I kind of want to bop around a little bit, And I think
Yeah.
that's a sign of a very like they're just like impressive songwriting chops, right? To be able to capture, like, as you mentioned, all these different emotions and moods that reflect, the ever loving march of time, and how, like, not every song is gonna be the perfect fit for every moment, but some of these are perfect
Yeah.
fits for perfect moments.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes him such a rewarding band to go back and listen to, because I make these little monthly playlists that are just made up of the songs that I found myself going back to a lot over the course of that month. And both February and March had Yo La Tengo tracks off of their new album, and I think it just goes to show, like, they just hit at different moments. Like, you're really focused on one track, and then a few weeks later, you're like, oh wow, like that one is really hitting in particular right now. Um, I think they're one of the best at doing that, and that comes with the territory of when you've been playing together for so long, and seeing them live. If you have an opportunity to catch them live, it's fucking incredible. Because just to see a band that is so tight and on the same wavelength, you don't get that a lot. But
Yeah,
Yo La Tengo are one of the best live bands out there. It's just like, it proves that it doesn't matter what age you are, like, you can still keep making really good music at the tail end of your career, and I really fucking love that. I think there's, a lot of people think about, like, oh, I should have I'm sort of past my prime. It's out of my heyday. We've talked about that a lot with hip hop, and like, oh well, this
hmm
guy's old now, so he can't be like an all-star rapper anymore. It's a young man's game, and I like that this pushes against it, and that, like, here are these just three people playing together for 40 years, kind of old, but still absolutely, like, fucking killing it, and still finding new ways to enjoy themselves and enjoy music, and keep not necessarily reinventing their sound, but improving upon it. It's like, how do you not get
refining.
excited about that? Yeah, yeah. As someone who's creating art and music, you're like, wow, it never ends. It's a continuing journey and experience to just keep making, and finding more of yourself, and doing new stuff with it. So glad this record came around and clicked for you. That's the power of Yo La Tango, baby. It always they come through at some point.
You're telling me a yo tango this la?
Oh, you better believe it, baby. You
As
better
my closing
fucking
thought,
believe it.
all I want to say is that if art is reinvention and self discovery, why should it end when you hit like 35?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, an album that I think will end up on this podcast at some point is David Bowie's Black Star. Because I think that is such a great example of that. But, like, you're never too old to make things and discover things, and say things through art. So shout out to Yellow Tango. Keep doing what you're doing, baby. Shout out to Hoboken, New Jersey.
When I heard the knock on the door, I couldn't catch my breath. Is it too late to call this off? We could slip away. Oh, wouldn't that be better?
Danny, I want to get a beverage check going. We haven't done one of those in a while. What are you drinking?
I'm just sipping on a glass of water. What's your beverage?
Um, yeah, I'm also drinking water. Huh? I thought that would have been a little funnier. Well,
Nice and
yeah.
hydrated.
Water's cool. Water's fine.
Speaking of
Um,
water,
whoa.
it transitions almost well into the album I was going to give you next time on this
Uh-oh.
episode of We Demand a Podcast. Same pod time, same pod place. I was going, you beat me to Dad Rock, which made me very sad because I definitely listen to more
Yeah,
Dad Rock
baby.
than you do. But I am going to beat you to a decade. I'm going to beat you to the 60s. So
Oh.
I'm going to give you seminal classic record featuring some songs you probably have heard and some you haven't. It's Pastel Blues by Nina Simone. I've been listening to this record as it's been getting warmer. Even though it's technically a blues record, it's really good for the spring. So
Nice. Okay. That's exciting. I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that because Nina Simone's one of those artists where I've never really explored her discography. You just hear like a lot of songs
I
from her.
feel good or whatever. Feeling good. Sorry.
Yeah, feeling good. Obviously, like Strange Fruit is a very, very big one for obvious reasons.
I will say the Strange Fruit is on this one. So, but there's one other you might have heard before, but like the other ones you haven't. And it's also, a place to talk about that coming into a record, like when you're already kind of familiar with it, how does that impact it? When it's not like a Converse, like Guantanamo Bay torture memory.
Yeah. Yeah, they weren't playing Strange Fruit at Converse, that's for sure.
Jesus Christ. Fucking hell.
That one didn't make the playlist for some reason.
Fuck. There's one guy at corporate always slipping it on and someone is just taking it off.
They found it. Though they used to play that Ghostface Killah song Run. So it'd be like, if you're still in the school zone, run. Like half the song was censored. I'm like, why the fuck is this song even on here? And you're gonna like cut half of it out.
I'm pretty sure that they were playing. There's a Sirius XM station which was like hip hop classic that would play like 80s and 90s
it was like
stuff.
It was like a
corporate
curated
one?
like yeah.
Oh my God damn it.
Yeah.
That's
Because I remember they did like some sort of I swear it was like some sort of like contest sort of thing where
to get your song on there.
Something like that. Yeah.
They should have put the I'm trying to think of the funniest song they could put on there that you'd have to censor. Like what's the my neck my back would be a good one.
Oh my God.
My and my that'd be pretty good.
I don't know. So well, maybe we'll talk about that next episode. We'll think about it. Next episode I'll be a changed man. I would have gone across the pond.
Oh God, you're gonna come back talking like this? Why not?
I got a thing or two to say about Nina Simone's 1965 album. Yeah, it's gonna be bad.
You really went straight into Paul McCartney there.
You do have permission to kill me if I start talking like that. It's now been captured, so this can be used as evidence. I have given my consent. But getting things back on track, you said it, not me. You mentioned Dad Rock. And you said, I beat you to Dad Rock. And well, Danny, all roads lead back to Dad Rock. This album that I'm going to give you has been a delayed selection for like 3 or 4 months now. But I feel that it is finally the time to give you a Wilco record. Because Wilco are fucking awesome. And I could be a run-of-the-mill guy and give you Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, but that's one of those albums that's kind of been talked to death. We could just sit here and recite the usual tidbits. I'm throwing you a curveball.
Oh.
I'm giving you the album that came out before that. It's called Summer Teeth. came out in 1999. I think it's again kind of like this Yo La Tengo record, a good blend of what Wilco were at the time and what they would go on to become. You have great examples of Jeff Tweedy's songwriting and their styles, but had to talk about Wilco at some point. Now people put them up there in the dad rock category, but
if an album from
Wilco,
1999 is in the dad rock category, I'm gonna kill myself.
Hey,
like, come on.
Well, their first album came out in 1995, and
that's how old I am. I can't be.
Well,
I'm not dad rock. I'm not dad rock. I'm youthful. I'm full of vim and vigor. I'm on the cutting edge.
I got bad news for you, Danny.
Oh, fuck.
Turns out there's a little Danny running around somewhere.
There's actually 551.
Yeah, I gave birth to him, so we got a lot to talk about.
On the next episode, it's actually just gonna be our alimony hearing.
Yeah,
kind of in the style of On Cinema. It's just gonna be the trial.
Well, one of us will be sitting there. I was, when are we gonna talk about albums? I have some. What
about our sons?
Some record store classics for us to get over, the record store classic is like the Baha Men album.
Hey, listen, I had that record, and we never did find out who let the dogs out. We just never did. It's one of the most famous cold cases in history.
Don't dig too deep. Don't dig too deep. You might not like what you find, but I do hope you like Wilco and you enjoy listening to Summer Teeth. I think it's a good record for getting into the spring season. So, yeah, excited to talk about that one.
Do you have anything else?
No, I mean, hopefully I survive the England trip. I'll be walking through the rainy streets of London listening to Nina Simone. I think that's pretty fitting.
Have a steak pie and jellied eels for me.
Oh yeah, another friend of mine is like, yeah, get jellied eel. I'm like,
no,
I'm doing that.
Don't do. Listen, the national dish of England is chicken tikka, so just like get that.
Yeah,
you'll thank yourself later.
Yeah, I am. This is the final note. I am going to try to get the cheekiest Nando's that I've ever had.
So,
stay tuned, everyone. I will report back next time. We will see you then.
Bye-bye.